Hello, everyone, and welcome to this exciting event. We are so excited to be spreading health and wellness and literacy. I'd like to introduce myself first. My name is Matthew Probst, and I'm the co-director of 100% Community San Miguel County. And we are so excited to sponsor and be a part of this program. Uh, you know, everyone has a story. I think that's the exciting thing. We all have a story. We're all connected with our stories, and hearing the stories of others unites us and strengthens our own stories. And so we are not alone. We are one aspen grove, a group of trees, one living organism, not individual trees, but to know that we have to look under the soil and see that our roots are all connected. And I think that this program is going to do an amazing job of that. Despite this pandemic and despite having to be at home, there's an opportunity for us to share and weave and learn more about each other. With that being said, I would love to introduce our first author now and our first reader. And so that is Katie Christianson. And Katie is very, very talented. I think this is a great kickoff. She is an educator. She has a lot of experience in education and with lots of age groups, but especially with little people, and that's what we're targeting here today, and with just art in general. So, literacy is a form of art, absolutely. Dance is a form of art and something that she's talented in and has taught as well. And so with no further delay, Katie, take it away.
Thank you, Matt. Today's reading is Peter Rabbit. So I will share my screen so that our viewers can watch the book as well as read it. All right, welcome. The first thing we're going to do today as we're getting ready to read is we're going to get the wiggles out. Because sometimes sitting down to listen to a story can be really wonderful. And sometimes your body wants to move more than your mind does. So we're going to start with a little bit of time to get the wiggles out. Those wiggles can be distracting. So whatever you're doing right now, stand up if you can. And we're going to take a big breath in through your nose, like you're smelling something delicious. And then blow out like you're blowing out candles or blowing up a balloon. We'll do that again. Big breath in and out. And now we're going to get the wiggles out from head to toe. So you start with your head, wiggle your head around, wiggle it around, and look from one side to the other side, and way up high and way down low. And then we'll get your shoulders shrugged up and down and moved around and wiggled. And then flap your arms and wiggle those around. And wiggle out your middle, and wiggle out your buns, wiggle out your knees, and then wiggle out your toes. Then one more big breath in, and blow out. And then wherever you are, you can have a seat, or you can lay down and be comfortable. And if you have a mama, or a papa, or a sister, or a pet to snuggle up with, you can do that too. So let's start with the tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits. Their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put into a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took down a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears. But his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind. And he rushed in the tool shed and he jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently, Peter sneezed, "Christian!" and Mr. McGregor was after him in no time. And he tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, it was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity, lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out and over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently, he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scratch, 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 scratch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes. But presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go, along a straight walk and behind some blackcurrant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him until he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down on the nice soft sand of the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking, She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I am sorry to say that Peter was not well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and she made him some chamomile tea. And she gave a dose of it to Peter, 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The end.